Tonight's story is brought to you by PhoenFX. PhoenFX is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to helping charities with fundraising by providing them with the most innovative scarehouse and walkthrough events. They have created fully adaptive environments for the sensory sensitive so that everyone can enjoy the experience. For more information on PhoenFX and their services, please visit them on the web at www.phonfx.org. Without further ado, tonight's tale awaits you, right through there.
Welcome, my friends. Come, sit around the fire and let me spin another tale for your amusement. These tales, I tell you, these nightmares found only around the fireside, speak of many things, things which cannot be explained. Stories of the unknown, the unseen, and poorly understood. Some disturbing, yes, some terrifying, certainly. Stories of the darkness which reside in all of humanity, expressed in ways in which nature herself cannot account for, things beyond her ability and even beyond her comprehension, stories buried in time and hidden by shadow. A man runs from what? We do not know, but the terror of it drives him forward. Forward until forward can no longer be found, and then his nightmare ends. He ran. With each harried and chaotic step, the crunch of leaves echoed through the wood's preserves, announcing his presence to the wildlife. Sometimes they would react, a quick shuffle up a tree by a high-strung squirrel, or a pretty red and black songbird would stop singing until he had passed. Most of the time, he was ignored. The insects in the air paid him little mind, and he didn't notice the occasional red ant burrowing into his sock and then sinking its tiny mandibles into his flesh. He didn't notice the fly latching on to drink the sweat which flowed freely from his brow, or the mosquito with its syringe-like vestibule plunging into the skin of his hands, drinking deeply of the blood which flowed at an increased rate as he barreled down that woodland path. And there were those things which he enjoyed normally, in which his senses only vaguely registered now. He took no notice of how the sunlight fell through the canopy of the green leafy trees well over his head and danced across the uncharted path he ran along. He didn't notice the warm summer breeze which blew across him as he fled from what lay behind him, the pain, the sorrow, the hatred he was trying desperately to run from. What he did notice was the sound of the sirens was dying away. He could no longer hear the shouts of men and women or the barking of the dogs. The sounds of cars with roaring engines and trucks engaging their air brakes were long in the past, as was the sound of doors slamming and the voices from people he knew, people he didn't know, and people he didn't care to know screaming at him. The words they used to trap and entangle him were seared into his memory like the branding of the damned and their sin-filled souls in the hell they created. They wanted him back. They needed him here. They needed him to be at fault for all that had happened back there behind him. They needed to drag him back into the aberrant, delusional havoc they had created for him, each in their own little bubble, maniacally protecting the worlds they had created, and all the while trying to assimilate him into their madness. They needed to make him conform to their rules, to their hysteria, and to give them something they desperately needed, a reason to continue. And when he left, they raged against the unsanctioned change. They screamed and cried and made him their target, their sole focus for the unhinged rants, accusations, and attacks. To keep him, they tried to break him, to bully and cajole him. They tried all manner of dark and evil tricks, and they used their sociopathy-fueled tactics to force him to change, to enforce their corporeality on him. As he rebelled against them, they recruited others, those that believed like them, with no cause for that belief other than they wanted to believe what was said. They grew violent when he walked away. They knew violence begat violence, and a situation created for violence will always end in violence. But once they got a taste for blood, they began to crave it, and worse, they became used to it. Someone else's blood, someone else's pain and suffering became normal to them, and then it became expected. And so, his walk turned to a run. He broke free from them in the only way he could. He had no love of violence, but had no fear of it either. He found it distasteful, but a necessary step to break free from their chokehold. And now they would create him to be what they needed him to be, even in his absence. He knew he could not survive this unscathed, but what was one more scar? He had so many from them. As he ran, they sounded the alarms. Authoritarian men came to force him back into that chaos. They too shouted at him. But this time he was not there to respond, to react to them, or to reject and defend against their rebukes. He was not there to rebuke their actions or to swallow their threats. No, he ran. He ran to the only place he knew he could stand a chance to survive. Away. As he ran, and with every strike of his foot against the dirt floor of the wooded unknown, he prayed with a faith he had never previously felt. To whom, he did not know, but he prayed to whoever would listen, to whoever would help him move forward and move beyond. The little faith he had was emboldened by the dying shouts and screams and echoes of betrayal and excruciating agony behind him, and with every terrified step forward that faith grew just a little more. He began to believe that those steps would carry him to where he needed to be. He believed, that is, until the one thing he needed, the one thing he could count on to always be there, was gone. The ground had left him, and he tumbled forward into the desolate blackness of nothingness. There was no sound now, except the call of night birds and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. It all seemed distant to him. The smell of fresh, wet dirt permeated the air. With each breath he took, he found the air was cool and as wet as the dirt under him. But it wasn't the air that woke him, nor the high-pitched, often shrill, too shrill for his ears at the moment, call of the night birds, nor the dampness of the dirt beneath him. It wasn't the feel of 1,000 different tiny life forms crawling over his skin, or the chill of his clothing against his body. It wasn't the dirt in his nose, or his eyes, or under his fingertips. What woke him was the excruciating pain in his shin, that sometimes dull and sometimes sharp, achy pain which told him there was something wrong, something very wrong with his leg. Slowly, his eyes opened to see the dirt beneath him. His head lay still, cheek against the dirt and rocks, and all he could see was a wall of dirt which extended well beyond his field of vision. The pain in his leg was a great detriment to his desire to change his position for a better look at his surroundings, but he knew he needed to have a better understanding of what his situation was. He shifted slightly to allow the palms of his hands to lay flat against the dirt near his shoulders. He took several deep breaths as he tried to gather his courage to face the veritable storm of pain which he feared was inevitable with large movements. His fear was justified. As he pushed himself onto his side, shocks of electric agony burned through his lower extremities and into his back, ripping through every nerve like a marksman's bullet straight into his skull. His eyes watered and he cried out, breaking the still and peacefulness of the night air. He was no stranger to pain, and yet every time it came it seemed to take him by surprise. He was no stranger to it indeed, but life had not jaded him enough for him to have come to expect it. And so he muscled through it, turning onto his side and then onto his back. Tears streamed down his face, and his jaw clenched against the irresistible urge to scream out in pain again. His eyes became clear, and then so did his vision. He saw the dirt walls which surrounded him. He saw tree roots and rocks, small holes and crevices in the uneven surface of the walls. Some of the smaller roots located well above him had been broken. He assumed this had happened because of his fall. He saw the night sky through the gently swaying canopy of trees several stories above through the rabbit hole he tumbled down. Humor intruded on his thoughts, as it was wont to do in times of great stress, and he wondered if a white rabbit with a pocket watch and severe anxiety issues would be passing through. The moment passed as quickly as it came. He refocused on the only visible egress from his burrow. He saw stars, but no moon and no clouds. He could see the occasional bird fly across the night sky, but no other movement. His heart sank into despair as he gained perspective on the predicament he was in. But he knew he could not waste time thinking in such a manner right now. It would lead to no positive outcome should he give in to this melancholic mood. What he needed was to focus on the next step, the next goal to accomplish. This is what would carry him through, the goal, the plan, the execution. And with this, his mood lightened a little, enough to begin the process of preparation for the next bout of acute suffering. Having accomplished this change of focus and knowing that he had already experienced the worst of the pain, he ventured one last heroic push to seat himself upright. The dirt wall was only a couple of feet away from him. All he would need to do is plant his palms into the dirt once more, push himself upright, and then back against the wall. He took a deep breath in, set his jaw, and pushed himself up. The pain was there, but not as intense as his first effort. This heartened him, gave him hope. He thought that maybe he had just not been properly prepared for the exertion the first time, and because of it, the pain took him by surprise. But he would not be taken again like that. This time he was prepared, and the wall was only a couple of feet behind him now. Once again he prepared himself. He breathed deeply, set his jaw, and pushed himself backwards. The last thing he felt, other than the heart-crushing, searing pain raging through his body, was the dirt wall against his back. A dizzying swoon washed over him, and a welcomed unconsciousness came to him very shortly after. His breathing was labored as he opened his eyes again. For the second time, the intolerable throbbing in his leg had woken him from his sleep. This time, the sun had risen, and the birds in the trees above him were singing joyfully. Their song seemed to echo off the walls of the dirt-encased abyss he had fallen into. His hands were covered in cool, damp dirt. He wiped them on his t-shirt in a vain attempt to clean them off before attempting to wipe the dirt from his eyes and face. His shirt had been ripped in places where, 2 days previously, there had been no holes. When he had pulled it from the stacked washer-dryer combo in his small apartment and placed it in the drawer of a small bureau in an equally small bedroom, the old t-shirt had been in good repair. There was dried blood on his scalp and in his hair. There were abrasions on his side and chest, and some of these caked in dried blood and mud as well. His entire torso felt bruised, and his head ached. His right leg throbbed incessantly, and had swollen enough to fill the entirety of the lower pant leg of his blue jeans. His foot, too, felt constricted by his tennis shoe. But most concerning was the blood which seeped through the pant leg, discoloring the dirt beneath it. As he looked at the walls of the dirt which encased him, he realized with gut-wrenching clarity he could not climb out of this place. Despair overtook him. He couldn't stave it off. no behavioral or spiritual techniques he had learned or the mental tricks he had acquired through experience could keep the black clouds from rolling through his mind and settling over his heart. He sat quietly, not shedding a tear, but not uttering a word, his head hanging, for God only knows how long. The only consistent factor was the pain he felt. It throbbed in time with his heartbeat, and soon or not, he couldn't tell anymore, the unrhythmed throbbing became familiar, predictable, and almost comforting. He timed his breathing to it. An inhale for 3 throbs, hold for 3 throbs, exhale for 3 throbs. He eventually elongated it to 5 throbs, and his thinking became clearer. Finally, he had calmed himself enough to be able to look at and appraise his surroundings. The subterranean void he currently inhabited was little more than just a pocket of earth. He was about 30 feet deep, which was his best guess at the moment, and the basin was wider at the bottom than the top. The opening to the world he once knew wasn't more than 6 feet in diameter, and yet the cavern he lay in must have been closer to 20 feet. The walls were sheer coming down from the opening and then angled slightly outward to form something like the beakers he remembered from the chemistry lab in high school. Even if his leg was perfectly normal, trying to climb out would be nearly impossible. The floor of this earthen flask was rain-etched dirt, with various veins running into small holes haphazardly distributed around the bottom perimeter. There was no sound down here, except for him and what he created. Above him, there were only the sounds of nature and of the woods on a beautiful, calm day. The trees, the breeze, and the wildlife created a pleasant symphony of peacefulness above him. But the one sound he was hoping to hear, he did not, the sound of crunching leaves under lively feet. For now, he was totally and utterly alone. Normally, this was what he preferred, and it felt very comfortable with. This time was different. He wasn't surrounded by his creature comforts, which gave him a sort of insentient companionship, which, although alone, did not leave him lonely. Down here, down in this open-faced grave, he felt very alone and abandoned. His only companion was the throbbing in his leg. His morose reflections were interrupted by a shadow crossing the aperture of his fox den. It had all the appearance of a human shadow, and a sudden wellspring of hope erupted within him. He called out to the shadow.
Hey!
He called out again and again
Help!
and again.
Hey!
There was no response from the shadow, and he heard no movement from above. He dismissed it as being a manifestation of a traumatized mind in an impossible situation. He had to keep a hold of his senses if he was going to survive, and giving in to these flights of fancy would not accomplish that goal. He sat for an incalculable amount of time listening and breathing in sync with his nociceptor-driven metronome. The sun traversed past the visible canopy, and the light in his less-than-homey burrow was starting to dim. He was warm, and the cool breeze which made it to him brought him a little comfort. And then it was there again. It was peeking over the edge of the opening, a shadowy figure staring down at him from above. Its eyes glowed with the last light of the day, its black fingers curling over the rim of the hole. It watched him intently. A cloud floated over the remaining sun, casting its own shadow upon the land. It passed slowly over, and as it exited, it took the shadow person with it. His heart raced. He didn't know what it was or what it wanted, but it surely wasn't there to help. He tried to calm himself using the throbbing in his leg, but this time to no avail. He had become hot all over, and he was sweating. He could no longer focus on any single thought or memory or flight of fancy. His hands shook from the adrenaline. He cycled through hot and cold spells. At one moment he would be sweating, and the next he would be shivering. The shivering was the worst for him. Every time a shiver would run down his spine, the injured leg would scream in protest, reducing him to tears. He wrapped his arms around himself to steady himself as much as to keep warm. He was thirsty, but there was no water to be found. Hunger had not yet touched him, which he dismissed as a reaction to the injuries. Those injuries had left him nauseous. The thought of how vomiting may impact his leg made him happy not to have food. His best and only hope was to sleep, to leave this world behind for the world of dreams, and to pray his sleep lasted. When he was asleep, he felt no physical pain. When he dreamed, and though he rarely remembered them in total, he knew he dreamed because of the remnants of those dreams as he woke every morning. He could leave the agony of this life and, just for a moment, know what it was like to be someone or something else. To cast away the cares and the worries of the day as if they never existed, and to fully immerse himself in a reality of his own creation was his goal now. But as with all fanciful adventures, he would have to awaken and return to the reality he had hoped to escape. That is, unless the nightmares returned, and then escape was impossible, much like now. He refocused his breathing on the throbbing in his leg. It calmed his mind and allowed him to wait patiently for the last rays of a dying sun to be extinguished, and as the stars came peeking through the canopy, and the moon began its nocturnal voyage across the ocean of night, he closed his eyes, the last rays of his dying hope setting with the sun in the western sky. He walked down his street in front of his apartment, and she was there. Her voice was magical, angelic, and it always made him smile. There was no greater joy for him than the touch of her hand against his skin, or the twinkle in her eye as she smiled at him. Her love was something stronger than time itself, more endearing than the granite of the earth, and beyond the comprehension of mere mortals, at least beyond the comprehension of anyone he had ever tried to explain it to. She was not of this world. She couldn't possibly be. She glowed in the sunlight. She shined at night. Her laughter could save him from the world and from himself. The day was hot as they walked together down that very familiar street, and for that moment he knew nothing of the world, nothing of the cares and the worries of day-to-day life, nothing of his own scars. He knew nothing but her. But the day grew hotter, and her touch grew softer. He looked down at her hand in his, and it turned to liquid. He quickly looked into her eyes and watched with horror as they melted away from his. She was gone, and the sun blazed down on him in an empty street surrounded by dirt.
Stop resisting!
Stop it now!
Stop resisting!
He floated in that old, massive Victorian mansion. Each hallway he glided down was tall and wide and filled with people. Each, in its own turn, was decorated with an old-fashioned lace-patterned wallpaper and dark brown wood accents and wainscoting. Each pillar between each panel was home to a wrought iron candelabra, each with 3 lit candles. The floor was covered in an indiscernibly patterned carpet, and there were doors. Each door led to a room. Some were large, far larger than the house could sustain. Some were small. Some led to different floors. Some of those floors were unfinished, and some had inoperable elevators. He only knew 2 things. First, he knew he had been there before. Second, he knew he had to get into the topmost tower. What he did not know was how to get there. He had been there before, but the way he remembered was not the way. And somewhere between the 3rd floor mezzanine and the 4th floor scaffolding-laden burned-out shell of a sunroom, he knew he had to start over again. Finding one of the inoperable elevators to take him to the stairway was of paramount importance, and so he looked for the elevator, an elevator he could not find.
Here.
He opened his eyes. He was still in his sepulcher with a view. It was dark, and he felt nothing but the cool breeze coming from the opening above him. And then he saw it. The shadow creature with glowing eyes peeking over the edge again. Only this time, the creature began to crawl down the wall, forever keeping him in sight with those eerily incandescent eyes. It crawled slowly down the wall in an erratic, zigzagging pattern, but always staying within his field of vision directly in front of him. First to the left, and then to the right, and back to the left. How the creature could be so sure-footed while never losing eye contact befuddled him. But with every step closer, the terror within him grew. Like a tide slowly rolling in, the terror swelled at an unimaginably slow pace, building to the final crescendo he knew was inevitably coming. Then the creature stopped. Firmly attached to the wall with gecko-like dexterity, the creature simply stared at him. And then the knees and elbows bent at unnatural angles, the shoulders and hips collapsed upon themselves, ankles and wrists hyperextended and then tensed. The creature sprang at him, never breaking eye contact. He awoke with a start, his eyes wide and heart beating furiously in his bruised and sore chest, and adrenaline coursing through his system. His breathing was heavy and labored. Sweat beaded at his brow, his mouth and lips were dry and his head pounded. His leg ebbed like thunderstorm, throwing shocks of lightning pain through his entire body. He stared straight ahead, his senses primed for any movement, for even a glimpse of those eyes staring at him in the dark. He breathed heavily in the night, watching his breath form little clouds in the cold air. But he wasn't cold. His body burned with the heat of a desert within him. He felt the heat. He felt the throbbing in his leg. He felt the aches in his body. All of this suffering brought him out of his twilight dreamscape and back into the present moment. The effects of the adrenaline was wearing off, and he was getting tired again. Hopefully, he could fall asleep before the shaking came back. He caught a slight movement from the corner of his eye and turned his head. His eyes met the shadow creature's eyes, with no more than a few short inches between them. Adrenaline dumped into his system, and he flung his body in the opposite direction away from the shadow creature. He landed hard and on top of his injured leg. His scream of utter agony was cut short by the blessed oblivion brought on by the altruistic unconsciousness of a mind deep in the throes of shock. The light of the overhead sun burned through his eyelids. The throbbing in his head matched the throbbing in his leg, which now laid twisted from below the knee. A pool of blood had spread around the area of the leg, his pant leg no longer being able to staunch the bleeding. There was no breeze that he could feel. All that was left was heat and insurmountable pain. His throat was dry, parched, and his attempt at speaking ended miserably in a grating croak, renewing the pain in his head. He looked around feebly and saw nothing. Nothing but dirt and dead leaves and a few animal bones. He blinked, and gritty sandpaper eyelids scraped across his eyes as they closed and reopened, causing more pain. It simply wasn't worth the effort any longer. And then he saw it, standing above him at the opening of his unintentional tomb, that shadow creature staring down at him. It threw dirt on him, handfuls at a time. He raised his arm in protest, pleading with the creature to stop, but it continued to cover him in mud. His body was encased, and the coolness of the wet dirt felt good against his skin. The weight of the dirt was comforting to him. He thought that maybe he had been wrong, that the creature was trying to help him by cooling him down. But that thought quickly erased when he saw the creature pick up a rock. He opened his eyes wide in panic as the creature threw it at him. The rock hit him squarely on the forehead, increasing his headache tenfold and opening up a gash. The blood from the wound trickled down thickly, slowly. The creature picked up another rock, and he tried pleading with it again, but the rock hit its mark. The creature picked up a third, and then a fourth, and then he slept again, a deep, dreamless sleep in which all pain had gone and there was nothing but cool, wet dirt. When the body had been brought into the coroner's office, it was in bad shape. The coroner noted even before the autopsy, the victim had been deceased for about 4 to 5 days given the degree of decomposition. The right leg had suffered a compound fracture of both the tibia and fibula, with a tibial protrusion through the lateral edge. The coroner also noted blunt force trauma to the frontal bone of the skull from an uneven surface. Given the fragments around the wound, he guessed it was a rock. After the autopsy, the coroner concluded the patient had died from shock resulting from bodily trauma, most likely from the fall and equally as likely exacerbated by the compound fracture, though the coroner made a notation in his report that if the shock hadn't killed him first, the blood loss, the fat embolism he found, the infection running rampant through his body, or the dehydration would have killed him in shortly after. He looked at the police report one more time and the crime scene pictures. The poor fool had fallen in a large hole and was found after the report of a foul stench a half-mile off of a popular hiking trail had been filed. The dogs were brought out, and they had found him lying at the bottom of the pit, half covered in dirt and holding a baseball-sized rock in his right hand. Can one really outrun their past? Or will it drive them to lengths they'd never thought they'd go? Will it chase them down and haunt them like a shadowy figure, forever waiting until they fall and can no longer run? One man found that answer, it seems. Thank you for joining us this evening for this episode of Fireside Nightmares.
Tonight's episode of Fireside Nightmares was sponsored in part by Everbright Solutions. When you need your lighting display done by professionals and done right, Everbright Solutions is there for you. Find them on Instagram at everbright_solutions_LLC and also by Redicus. Redicus is a leading cross-border e-commerce enterprise with a diverse product lineup including service calling systems, guest pager systems, tour guide systems, window intercom systems, conference devices, FM transmitters, and radios. Find them online at www.retekess.com. Be sure and listen in next week for our installment of Fireside Nightmares. These original short stories, based on folklore, urban legends, and the odd, demented flight of fancy, are sure to entertain and terrify. Good night.